Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Kunsang Payo Choling. We're, as always, very happy to have you with us today. And today's teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo is entitled How to Reach Enlightenment, something I think we all aspire to. In any case, this is part 1 of 2. It was a very long teaching, so we're showing the first half today and the second half next Sunday. So stay with us for both, and they will be up on the on YouTube. So thanks so very much. And with no further ado, off we go.
Bodhicitta is the great compassion. It's the awakening state. It is that which is inseparable from enlightenment itself. And I have very good fortune. My good fortune is that generally, for some reason I can't fathom, I tend to draw students that are interested in bodhicitta. They are interested in the practice of compassion. It's not to say that every student, when they walk through this door, has mastery of the practice of compassion. It doesn't mean that when we come through this door, already all refinements have been made and there's nothing to do but be happy about it. But it does mean that the students that I tend to draw have some kind of karmic connection, some sort of, well, I can only say connection with the practice of bodhicitta or the idea of bodhicitta. And for that, I consider myself very fortunate. And I consider my students very fortunate as well. Because there are many, there's a lot of misinformation about what one's path should be, about the study of Buddha nature, about the study of Dharma and its varied practices, but particularly about what that precious awakened state that the Buddha spoke of and that the Buddha displayed actually is. Many of us have ideas about what that precious awakened state is about, that state of enlightenment. We think that enlightenment has a certain image, that it looks a certain way, that maybe people that are enlightened are very tall. There you go, Richard. That was your big shot there, buddy. Or maybe we think that that enlightenment makes us very somber and very masterful looking. Or maybe we think that enlightenment makes us go and sit on a rock for a long time and contemplate, be very quiet. And maybe we think that enlightenment requires that we can be completely separate from the world, that we go sit on a mountain in the Himalayas somewhere and have no earthly idea how to catch a taxi cab. All of us have different ideas about enlightenment. And the reason why I'm making such a big deal about that is because of where I'm living right now. I'm living in Sedona, Arizona, which is a very New Age spiritual kind of place. And it's interesting to hear all the different ideas that people have about what enlightenment ought to look like. It's just pretty darn interesting. So, a lot of people have the idea that what the Buddha displayed and what the Buddha taught was more about show and tell than actuality. Most people think that enlightenment is some sort of demeanor that one carries, some sort of appearance that one holds, a certain look that one has, perhaps a set of mannerisms that we consider or we picture to be very holy. Perhaps enlightened people are always very dignified. Perhaps they hold enormous titles. We just have all these funny ideas, and a lot of people feel that true enlightenment is really about withdrawing, having no interaction with any other sentient being or with the world, and maybe accomplishing a kind of self-mastery. Well, unfortunately, that may not be the correct idea. Because in order for us to practice self-mastery, we have not achieved the precious awakened state. We are still locked into the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. And therefore, while we are doing that, when we are locked into self-nature being inherently real, we are also locked into the appearance of phenomena as being inherently solid and also real. And that is delusion. And even if we have accomplished some kind of self-mastery, that means we have mastered our emotional fluctuations and our moods, and we have maybe mastered our physical body, maybe we can make it sit for a long time in a lotus position or something like that. We have this idea that if we do these things, then perhaps we will have achieved enlightenment. But in fact, in the Buddha Dharma, we are taught that the precious awakened state can be considered like the sun, if you will. To consider the precious awakened state like the sun, we could consider the bodhicitta to be like the sun's rays. Bodhicitta, or the great compassion, could be considered an emanation or display of that precious awakened state. These two are synonymous and inseparable from one another. To be fully awakened as the Buddha is awakened, one is the very display of bodhicitta, or compassion. In the same way that the sun and the sun's rays cannot be separated, and they are part of the same reality. In that way, enlightenment, the practice of compassion, or the giving rise to bodhicitta, these are the same as well. The bodhicitta is the very display of enlightenment itself. When we think about the bodhicitta, we think that perhaps it is the idea of being kind of like a good person. And so maybe we're falling into the trap of thinking, oh, even if what she says is true, then if I were to be enlightened, I would be a great master, and then on top of that, I would be a good person. Well, that's not really how it is. This giving rise to the bodhicitta is a natural expression of the state of awakening, or the precious enlightenment that Lord Buddha himself talked about. In that precious state of awakening, we realize, or it is understood, that all sentient beings are inherently the same, and that their nature is that primordial wisdom view, that primordial wisdom nature, that uncontrived reality that is our true nature, that is not separate, is free of all conceptualization. It is unborn and yet completely finished and realized. That state is literally without description. As we demonstrate the bodhicitta, we know that at that point, we are actually giving rise to the state of enlightenment. These two cannot be separated. And no matter how we think of it, whatever view we hold as to what all of this must look like, it has to be understood that without bodhicitta, without giving rise to this supreme compassion, without giving rise to the very notion or thought that the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings is what is really important and what is really the point of prayer, there simply is no realization. As one approaches, perhaps, the state of realization, one of the amazing things that we might come to know is the awareness that all sentient beings are that same nature, free of any contrivance and inseparable from one another. So that for me to be some kind of great master, or for you to be some kind of great master sitting on a rock somewhere, simply meditating on self-perfection, what would that really amount to if you thought about it? That would amount to, well, self-perfection. But the self would still be there, and the self by its nature really cannot be perfect. In that state of awakening, one notices, or one is certain, I should say, or gives rise to the awareness that in truth, I cannot be separated from you. And for one to achieve realization, one recognizes that the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings is equal to and non-dual with our own salvation. Literally, the awakening bodhisattva knows that he or she cannot be free without the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. That the idea of self-mastery, or maybe achieving some sort of realization that you can hold and carry away, that maybe that idea, that very idea, is a delusion. The bodhicitta is literally our great hope. Without the great bodhisattvas and the great Buddhas giving rise to the bodhicitta, there would be no teachers returning to the world for our sake. There would be no path, because none of the bodhisattvas, none of the Buddhas would have come and offered the path to this world. So there would be no method. And of course, if there is no method, there could be no result. So it's the commitment, the compassion, the nature of the bodhisattvas, of the Buddhas, of these lamas that return again and again and again for our sake, that give us the hope that we have today. Even when we recite our lineage prayers, even when we think about what it is that has brought us to this moment, when we recite our lineage prayers, those of you that have practiced here for a while, there's a long list of the most magnificent bodhisattvas, each one having accomplished, well, things that we couldn't even imagine. Each one of them having accomplished amazing states of realization and bliss, amazing states of accomplishment, and having passed that knowledge and wisdom and that ability and those teachings on from teacher to student, and from the student becoming a teacher to their student, to their student, to their student, and a great unbroken lineage that brings us to this point today. And that lineage is the very display of bodhicitta. That's what it is. It is the appearance of that enlightened intention, of Lord Buddha's enlightened compassion, of Guru Rinpoche's miraculous activity. It is the display of that nature entering into the world that is the very lineage that we draw the milk of Dharma from. So this bodhicitta is the most precious, and it is the only hope that any of us have. So to me, if I can teach about the bodhicitta every time I teach, I'm satisfied. I feel like I hold in my heart very carefully what Lord Buddha himself actually said when he said, well, I don't remember the words exactly, but he said something like this. I'll have to use my own language if you'll forgive me. Remember, he didn't come from Brooklyn. Lord Buddha himself said, if you have the practice of bodhicitta, you have everything. That is enough. So within that amazing practice, within that amazing teaching, is everything that we need. How phenomenal. The understanding more so is as described. Bodhicitta is inseparable from very nature of enlightenment itself. It is the display of that Buddha nature that appears as the bodhicitta, is the expression of that nature that is the living reality of the Buddha Dharma practiced in this world. When our teachers come to teach us, the reason that they do so and the method that they use is the great bodhicitta. It is the reality that is the basis, the foundation for everything that we do. And so, to understand something about the bodhicitta is extremely important. To give rise to the bodhicitta is even more important still. But in order to do so, we have to build a foundation. And that foundation has to be one of understanding. To understand the condition of sentient beings and the reality of the cycle of death and rebirth, or samsara. To understand that, natural offers us a way by which we can give rise to the bodhicitta. The Buddha teaches us that we should always, from the first moment we pick up Dharma, till the very last moment of accomplishment, we should always, always contemplate on the faults of cyclic existence. When we talk about the faults of cyclic existence, well, sometimes modern people think, I'd rather not think about the faults of modern existence. I'd rather not think of the faults of cyclic existence. I would rather have a positive attitude. I would rather not think in a negative way. And my answer to that is always something like, well, the moment you're born, you have a journey in front of you. And that journey is kind of like walking through a room. You know, you come in the door of birth and you go out the door of death. And in the meantime, you're traveling through this room. This room is full of obstacles, furniture, tables, all kinds of stuff, symbolically speaking. This room is full of all kinds of obstacles. Now you have a choice here. You can either turn off the lights, pull the shades, and have it be perfectly pitch back and stumble your way through and hope that you don't hurt yourself too bad. Take a shot. Or you can turn on the light, see where the obstacles are, and move around them, move over them, move through them, whatever it is that's required. For myself, I choose to be more practical. And in my thinking, even as a modern woman, this practice of bodhicitta, this giving rise to compassion, this practice of Dharma is a very practical thing to do. I prefer to go through this journey of life being aware of the obstacles and having the tools in my hand to be able to overcome them. Why leave everything up to chance? So that being the choice, we begin to study about the faults of cyclic existence. And we notice that there are certain things about cyclic existence that, if once we realize, may change our view about everything. And I've talked about this before, and even this weekend I've talked about it, but one of the most astounding realizations that we obviously don't have yet. When I say obviously don't have, I say that because you can tell by how we act. Not by what we say. We might say we understand this, but clearly by the way we act, we do not understand that there is no material accomplishment or possession or ordinary thing that you can accomplish in this lifetime that you actually take with you at the time of your death. We don't act like we understand that. We say we do. I mean, logically, you know that when you die, that's it. You know, your body doesn't go with you. Nothing that you've got goes with you. But if you watch the way we act like people who think this is going to go on forever. Who think that all we have to do is keep accumulating, and bingo, we're going to be happy. That's the way we act. And yet we don't take the time to give rise to these inner good qualities. Habits of mind that are pure, thoughtful, and virtuous. We don't give rise to the capacity to love more, to be more compassionate. We don't give rise to generosity. And yet these are habitual tendencies. These are qualities of mind that literally you can take with you. The seeds that one plants in one life do manifest in the next. So it's like we've got everything backwards. We think, oh, I'd better do everything that my culture and my society and even my parents has told me to be successful at. Never mind all those subtle things for when I get old and have lots of time. Or maybe not. Maybe we won't even care. Maybe we'll just play golf. I mean, I've known people to think that it's a worthy thing to spend the last days of their life doing things that I wouldn't have done on the first days of my life. Just wasting time. Excuse me. So, we act like people who really don't understand anything at all. It seems like we spend our lives very, very busy, working very, very hard with constant distractions. And it's not that we're lazy. It's not that we just lay around. It's not that we don't try. We are the kings and queens of trying, and we are busy all the time. But it's like we have mixed messages. We don't really know what to be busy with. We're told that in order to be a successful person, you have to gather enough together so that you can leave something to other people after you die. I mean money and possessions and houses and cars and stuff like that. And we are told that, you know, in order to be really successful, all of our children have to go to great colleges and they should all be doctors and lawyers, and we have all these crazy standards, and we either measure up to them or maybe up to one or two of them, and we spend our whole lives working so hard at this. I mean, it's not like people are lazy. We're not just hanging out drinking lemonade. And yet, at the end of our lives, one of the things that is universally true is that each of us in our own way, according to our, again, habitual tendency and karmic capacity, we realize at the end of our lives that we have just had this glorious opportunity that literally we have gone to this continent full of gems and we've walked away empty-handed. That realization at the end of one's life when you say, if only I had practiced, if only I had developed some spiritual inner qualities that could see me through this time, if only I had not wasted my time as a human being, but maybe given rise to some compassion or something worthy instead of this money I accumulate, these houses and this property, and what good is it now? This is a common thing that happens to us at the end of our lives. And the great thing about practicing the Buddha Dharma is that we get to consider these things while there is still time, while our lives are still going on. Now, one of the things that the Buddha prepares us for is that life is not permanent, is that all things are impermanent. And once again, we say, ha ha ha, I know that. Birth and death, I got that. But we don't act like people that know that. We don't act like people that understand everything is impermanent. We act like people that grab for something, whether it's a thing or a state of mind or an event or a vacation or whatever it happens to be. We grab for that, or a person or a marriage or a whatever. We grab for that and you think, I've got that, I have that, now I will be happy. And we think that that's going to do it for us. If only I had that marriage, if only I had that job, if only I had that money or situation, then I would be happy. And we act like people who genuinely think that somehow an impermanent thing could make a difference in an impermanent life that's permanent. A permanent difference. How could that be? So logically we know this is not true, but emotionally we act like people who believe it will always be this way. And we can stay right here and comfortably collect our material reality. That's why the Buddha taught in the way that he did, asking us to contemplate impermanence, to contemplate the nature of samsara, its faults, its indications and its qualities. Not because upon hearing these things we could just memorize the facts, and not because we need to logically know this stuff and then that's it, we just know it in our minds. The Buddha taught us to contemplate these things again and again. Why? Because in our delusion we have so reinforced these false assumptions about what's really important in our lives, that even though logically we know we can't take it with us, even though logically we know that everything's impermanent, emotionally, psychically, we act as if we don't understand anything. And what that is a visible display of our habitual tendencies. We literally have the habit of samsaric beings. We have the habit of beings who are wandering in samsara and think in that way. We have the habit of delusion. Contemplation, therefore, is meant to slowly transform that habitual tendency. It's not all that different from what? Quitting smoking. You know, if you are a smoker, every time you pick up that cigarette and smoke that cigarette and continue on with your lung cancer thing there, Every time that you do that, you're putting more and more weight in the addictive, habitual tendency pile. So this pile is going whoosh, like that. On the other hand, every time that you abstain, that you work on your compulsions, that you find alternative methods, that you allow those compulsions to relax and to be pacified, it's like you're putting weight in the other pile. So it's kind of like that with our contemplation. While we are constantly involved with samsaric tendencies and samsaric habitual patterns, we are constantly reinforcing the causes of suffering, the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, these ideas. We're constantly reinforcing them as if we were repeating a mantra, constantly practicing delusion. But when we practice the Buddha Dharma, when we begin to contemplate and recognize the faults of cyclic existence and begin to act appropriately based on that understanding, and that to practice and to give rise to the bodhicitta, then it's like we're putting some weight in the other pile. And it's not as though suddenly we are able to argue our way out of our own habitual tendencies. It's more like, and you know how this works with habit patterns. You have that habit that you had, but with practice, you can put something in the other pile, and this naturally becomes less of a focus. It naturally pacifies. The great thing about humans is that we literally can't do two things at one time. We can't be addicted and not addicted at the same time. We can't be compulsive and not compulsive at the same time. We don't know how. So in practicing this kind of contemplation that gives rise to some understanding, and thereby acting accordingly to practice our path, it leaves alone this tendency to accumulate habitual samsaric behavior and begins to weigh in on the other pile. So contemplation on the Buddha's path is extremely important. And my experience has been, if we don't contemplate the faults of cyclic existence, we really forget what the entire point is. Then we slip into the wrong view of thinking, oh, I have to have a spiritual path, or I have to be a Buddhist because it's simply exotic, cool, and neat, and it pisses my mother off. And that, of course, there's no heart for practice then. You might as well, pick up a guitar and become a rock singer. That'll piss your mother off too. So it doesn't really, at that point we don't have the heart for practice. This contemplation then is very, very necessary. So let's examine the faults of cyclic existence. Gee, where do you start? My first suggestion as a modern person, and this sounds so fundamental that you would think, gee, I came here for this. My first suggestion as a modern person, see, in the Buddha Dharma we are taught these are the faults of cyclic existence. We open a book and we read a list. And it's the way that the Buddha Dharma is taught. There are many lists, the 10s of this, the 17s of that, the 24s of the other thing, the 7 unmentionables and the 27 semi-mentionables, and there's all these grocery lists, of things. And in the culture that occurs, there's a common ground there, and that's the way we think. But in this culture, that's kind of foreign to us. We don't understand listing things and just looking at these lists and saying, okay, that's it. We are modern people, and we were born when there were TVs and radios and satellites, and so we need to observe the world around us. So my suggestion is, if you need to understand the faults of cyclic existence like never before, what you need to do is watch CNN. I really recommend this. I should be the CNN spokeswoman. All you have to do is open your eyes, read the paper, watch the news, and you can see that suffering is all pervasive. Watching what's happening in Europe right now, we never thought we'd see that again. People herded off in cattle cars. You know, we never thought we'd see that. People stuck together in camps with barbed wire and no food and nowhere to go to the bathroom, and we never thought we'd see that kind of thing. And yet we are seeing it. Sometimes we get the idea that, oh, certain kinds of suffering, well, we've moved past that. We're not suffering like that anymore. It's ongoing. The Buddha teaches us that the suffering of samsara is cyclic, all-pervasive, and that it is the very nature of samsara to be filled with fault. So we see that suffering is all pervasive, that it hasn't stopped. There's terrible suffering throughout the world. And we begin to wonder, what can we do about it? Maybe it moves us. Maybe we feel like it's unbearable. I've been making myself watch CNN practically all day, a lot. And I find that the condition of the world is unbearable. It is unbearable to see that kind of suffering. So we see in this world alone, what the Buddha said about samsara is true. The suffering is all pervasive. Even if we just look at the human condition, this suffering is all pervasive. It never ends. And that's only humans. What about the condition of animals who are killed for their meat or their skin or their pearls, like oysters? What about the conditions of animals that are forced to work all day long? They didn't apply for that job. No workman's comp when they break down either. So the condition of animals is terrible. You think, oh, well, you know, I have animals and I take good care of them. Well, that's your animals, but in the realm of the animal kingdom, there is terrible fear and terrible suffering of all kinds. So the Buddha talked about the animal realm and he talked about the human realm, and he was right on both accounts. So we have to think that the other teachings that the Buddha has given about the rest of cyclic existence, the formless beings that are so many in number and kind that we can't even conceptualize what they are. That in every one of these realms there is so much suffering. It is all pervasive. So that is the reality that we are being taught by the Buddha. Now what that gives us is the opportunity to make decisions that we couldn't make unless we had that information.
So thank you so much for joining with us today. And we hope you enjoyed part 1. Part 2 will be next Sunday, also at 11 a.m. Also during this week, there'll be, if you're in the area and not marching down in DC, there will be a lot of activity surrounding the throne. Is just going to begin painting tomorrow, and the design painting. The background painting has, I believe, just been finished, or will be soon. It's in that kind of state. So, but lots of activity here. Come on by. The grounds are always open dawn to dusk every day, and we welcome you to come and enjoy the serenity, we hope, from some of the craziness in the world, and a rest for your mind. So please come, enjoy the space, and enjoy the online activities, which you can find on tara.org. The link is in the chat. So thanks again, and have a good day.